the summer of 1942, Germany appears unstoppable. 3 years earlier, Europe had been plunged into war. Since then, nation after nation had fallen before the advance of Adolf Hitler's armies. Poland collapsed in weeks. France, considered one of the strongest military powers in the world, was defeated in little more than a month. Across the continent, German victories seemed almost routine. From the Atlantic coast to the outskirts of Moscow, the map of Europe had been transformed. The Third Reich stood at the height of its power. Its armies controlled vast territories stretching across thousands of miles. Millions of soldiers served beneath the banners of Germany and its allies. Factories worked day and night. Trains carried supplies eastward without pause. Newspapers spoke confidently of final victory. To many observers around the world, the outcome of the war seemed increasingly inevitable. And yet, history often changes direction at the moment when victory appears most certain. How does an empire at the peak of its power begin its fall? The answer lies beside a river in southern Russia, a city that, at first glance, seemed unremarkable compared to the great capitals of Europe. Its name was Stalingrad. Stretching along the western bank of the Volga River, Stalingrad was one of the Soviet Union's most important industrial centers. Steel mills, tractor factories, machine plants, and warehouses lined the riverfront. Smoke rose constantly from factory chimneys. Freight vessels moved along the Volga, carrying oil, grain, weapons, and supplies between northern and southern Russia. More than 500,000 people called the city home. Workers crowded its factories. Families lived in apartment blocks overlooking the river. Children played in parks and schoolyards. Life continued beneath the distant shadow of a war that still seemed far away, for now. But while ordinary life continued inside the city, events hundreds of miles to the west were already placing Stalingrad directly in the path of history. The German invasion of the Soviet Union had begun in June 1941. What Hitler expected to be a rapid campaign had instead become a brutal struggle across enormous distances. The previous winter had halted the German advance before Moscow. The Soviet Union had survived. Now, in 1942, German leaders sought a new strategy. The objective was no longer Moscow. Instead, Hitler turned his attention southward. There, beyond the vast Russian plains, lay the oil fields of the Caucasus. Modern war depended on fuel. Tanks, trucks, aircraft, and ships all consumed enormous quantities of oil. Germany's growing military machine desperately needed access to new energy supplies. The road to those oil fields passed through southern Russia, and standing beside that route was Stalingrad. At first, the city was not the primary objective. Its strategic value came largely from its position along the Volga. Control of the river would disrupt Soviet transportation networks and protect the northern flank of German forces advancing toward the Caucasus. Yet another factor soon emerged. The city carried the name of Joseph Stalin himself. Stalingrad, a name that transformed a military objective into something far more symbolic. For Hitler, capturing the city promised a propaganda victory of enormous value. For Stalin, losing it became almost unthinkable. As summer progressed, German armies surged eastward once again. Columns of tanks rolled across the steppe. Aircraft dominated the skies. Villages and towns fell one after another. Reports arriving in Stalingrad grew increasingly alarming. The front was moving closer. Refugees began appearing on the roads. Military traffic increased throughout the city. Factories shifted to wartime production. Workers assembled tanks, artillery, and ammunition at a relentless pace. Yet many citizens still believed the city would be spared. Others trusted that the Red Army would stop the Germans long before they reached the Volga. The war had already consumed countless cities. Surely Stalingrad would not become the next battlefield. But history was moving toward the city with frightening speed. By August 1942, German forces stood only days away. The horizon itself seemed to carry signs of what was coming. Columns of smoke appeared in the distance. The sound of artillery sometimes drifted across the plains. Military commanders prepared defenses. Engineers built fortifications. Civilians dug trenches. The city that had once focused on production and commerce now prepared for survival. Yet almost nobody could fully imagine what lay ahead. Within weeks, Stalingrad would become the center of one of the most violent battles in human history. Entire neighborhoods would disappear. Factories would become fortresses. Streets would become front lines. And the city that stood quietly beside the Volga would soon determine the fate of an entire war. The storm was coming, and Stalingrad stood directly in its path. The storm arrives on August 23, 1942. Shortly before sunset, hundreds of German aircraft appear above Stalingrad. For weeks, the city has prepared for attack. Trenches have been dug. Anti-aircraft batteries stand ready. Factories continue working around the clock. But nothing prepares the people below for what is about to happen. Wave after wave of bombers crosses the sky. The first explosions strike the industrial districts, then the residential neighborhoods, then the riverfront. Within hours, enormous sections of the city are engulfed in flames. Columns of black smoke rise thousands of feet into the air, visible for miles across the surrounding steppe. Wooden homes burn instantly. Apartment buildings collapse into piles of rubble. Water mains rupture beneath the streets. Telephone lines vanish. Entire blocks disappear beneath fire and dust. Thousands of civilians are killed during the first day alone. By nightfall, Stalingrad resembles a burning ruin. Ironically, the destruction creates a problem the German commanders never expected. A modern city is difficult to defend. A shattered city is almost impossible to conquer. The mountains of rubble become natural fortifications. Collapsed walls create firing positions. Basements become bunkers. Every ruined building becomes a battlefield. As German forces enter the outskirts of the city, they discover that traditional warfare no longer applies. There are no clear front lines, no safe rear areas, no predictable battlefield. The fight becomes something entirely different, a struggle measured not in miles, but in rooms, not in cities, but in staircases, not in districts, but in individual floors of shattered buildings. German soldiers begin calling it Rattenkrieg, the War of Rats, a battle fought at point-blank range among ruins and debris. Inside the city, Soviet commanders issue a simple order: hold the line, no matter the cost. The Volga River becomes the city's lifeline. Every night, under constant artillery fire and air attack, small boats cross the river carrying ammunition, food, and reinforcements. Many never reach the shore, yet the crossings continue, again and again. The city survives because the river remains open. Factories continue operating even as fighting rages around them. Workers assemble tanks while artillery shells explode outside. Some vehicles leave the factory floor and drive directly into combat without ever being painted. The battle consumes everything. Weeks pass, then months. Entire divisions are destroyed, replaced, destroyed again. Certain locations become legendary. The grain elevator, the Red October factory, the Barakati factory, Mamayev Kurgan, and a small apartment block later known as Pavlov's house. Each changes hands repeatedly, sometimes several times in a single day. One German officer later writes that capturing a single building in Stalingrad often costs more lives than taking an entire village elsewhere on the Eastern Front. The city is slowly disappearing beneath constant violence. By October, Stalingrad is no longer truly a city. It is a landscape of ruins, a wasteland of shattered concrete, twisted steel, and burning debris. Yet somehow, the defenders remain. The Germans push closer to the Volga. In several places, Soviet troops hold only narrow strips of land along the riverbank. Some positions measure only a few hundred yards deep. For a moment, it appears that the city is finally about to fall. Berlin expects victory. The world expects victory. Even many German commanders believe the battle is nearly over. But while attention remains fixed on the ruins of Stalingrad, something larger is developing beyond the horizon. Far to the north and south of the city, Soviet forces are preparing a counter-offensive of enormous scale. For months, fresh divisions have been gathering in secret. Tanks, artillery, hundreds of thousands of soldiers. The preparations remain hidden beneath strict secrecy. Then, on November 19, 1942, the Soviet Union strikes. The operation receives a simple name, Operation Uranus. The attack does not focus on the city itself. Instead, it targets the weaker Romanian and Hungarian forces protecting the German flanks. The breakthrough comes rapidly. Entire defensive sectors collapse. Soviet armored formations surge forward across the frozen steppe. Within days, two advancing Soviet armies meet west of Stalingrad. The trap closes. Inside the encirclement stand more than 250,000 German and Axis troops. Among them is General Friedrich Paulus and Germany's Sixth Army, one of the most powerful military formations in Europe. Suddenly, the hunters have become the hunted. The city that was supposed to be conquered has become a prison. Winter arrives. Snow covers the ruins. Temperatures plunge far below freezing. Supply aircraft struggle to deliver food and ammunition. Many never arrive. Fuel begins to run out. Then food. Then hope. Inside the pocket, soldiers face hunger, exhaustion, and relentless Soviet attacks. Outside, rescue attempts fail. The encirclement tightens. What began as a battle for a city is becoming something far greater. An entire army now stands on the edge of destruction, and for the first time since the war began, the German war machine appears vulnerable. The city on the Volga has refused to fall, and in doing so, it has begun to change the course of history itself. By January 1943, the battle that began as a struggle for a single city has become a fight for survival. Inside the ruins of Stalingrad, the German Sixth Army is dying. The soldiers who once marched across Europe with confidence now face an enemy far more relentless than artillery or gunfire. Cold, hunger, exhaustion. The Soviet encirclement has held for weeks. Every road leading west is cut. Every railway is lost. The only remaining connection to the outside world is a shrinking air bridge that fails to deliver even a fraction of the supplies needed to sustain hundreds of thousands of men. Each day, transport aircraft attempt to reach the pocket. Each day, many do not return. The numbers tell the story. The army requires hundreds of tons of food, fuel, and ammunition every day simply to survive. Often, only a small fraction arrives. Sometimes almost nothing arrives at all. The situation deteriorates rapidly. Fuel shortages force vehicles to be abandoned. Artillery shells become precious. Medical supplies disappear. Field hospitals overflow with wounded soldiers, suffering from frostbite, disease, and starvation. The winter of southern Russia shows no mercy. Temperatures plunge far below freezing. Snow fills the shattered streets. The ruins of Stalingrad become a frozen graveyard. Yet even now, Adolf Hitler refuses to authorize a withdrawal. From his headquarters far away, he orders the Sixth Army to hold its position. No retreat. No surrender. The city that bears Stalin's name must not be abandoned. What was once a military objective has become a matter of prestige and ideology. Thousands of men will pay the price. As January progresses, Soviet forces tighten the ring around the trapped army. The pocket grows smaller. German positions collapse one after another. Entire units disappear from the battlefield. Some soldiers survive on little more than scraps of frozen bread and melted snow. Others search the ruins for anything that can be burned for warmth. The optimism of the previous summer feels impossibly distant. The empire that once seemed unstoppable now finds itself trapped inside a city it failed to conquer. Then, on January 31st, 1943, the inevitable finally occurs. General Friedrich Paulus, commander of the Sixth Army, surrenders. Only days earlier, Hitler had promoted him to the rank of field marshal. The message was clear. No German field marshal had ever surrendered. The expectation was that Paulus would fight to the end. Instead, he chooses survival. When Soviet troops enter his headquarters, they find a tired and defeated commander sitting among the ruins of what remains of his army. The southern sector of the pocket falls silent. 2 days later, the remaining northern forces surrender as well. The Battle of Stalingrad is over. The cost is staggering. More than 2 million soldiers and civilians have been killed, wounded, or captured during the campaign. Entire armies have been destroyed. Entire districts of the city have ceased to exist. Few buildings remain standing. The once busy industrial center along the Volga has become a landscape of rubble stretching to the horizon. Yet the consequences reach far beyond the ruins of Stalingrad itself. For Germany, the defeat is catastrophic. The Sixth Army, one of the most experienced and respected formations in the Wehrmacht, has effectively ceased to exist. Tens of thousands of prisoners begin a long march into captivity. Many will never return home. Across Europe, the myth of German invincibility begins to crack. For years, the Wehrmacht had advanced from victory to victory. Now the world has witnessed something entirely different. A major German army has been surrounded, defeated, destroyed. The psychological impact is enormous. In the Soviet Union, the victory becomes a symbol of national survival. The Red Army has proven it can not only resist the German advance, but reverse it. Morale surges. Factories continue producing weapons in unprecedented numbers. New offensives are planned. The initiative is beginning to shift, and once it shifts, it will never fully return. Throughout 1943 and 1944, Soviet forces push westward across Eastern Europe. The front that once moved relentlessly toward Moscow now moves relentlessly toward Berlin. Cities are liberated. Territories are reclaimed. German resources become increasingly strained. The war enters a new phase. The road that begins in the ruins of Stalingrad ultimately leads to the heart of the Third Reich itself. 2 years later, Soviet soldiers will raise their flag above Berlin. The empire that once dominated Europe will collapse amid fire and rubble of its own. Historians continue to debate whether Stalingrad was the single most important battle of the Second World War, but few question its significance. For many, it marks the moment the outcome of the war ceased to be uncertain. The battle did not end the conflict, yet it changed its direction forever. A city on the Volga had absorbed the full force of one of the most powerful military machines in history and refused to break. In doing so, it altered the fate of continents. The Battle of Stalingrad was never merely a fight for territory. It was a contest of endurance, industry, leadership, and will. A battle fought street by street, floor by floor, room by room. And when the smoke finally cleared, the city that had nearly vanished from the map remained standing. The empire that sought to conquer it did not. The road to Berlin began in the ruins of Stalingrad, and the course of the Second World War would never be the same again.